one palm against
Keep
his
your guard
chest.
tight.
That's it.
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
all she did. And a
Now,
man who had spent 38
Sensei,
years
I am
training to
ready.
destroy
Show
her
me.
dropped to his knees. Not because
Good.
she hit
Again.
him, because she didn't. She could have ended him in half a second. Everyone in that
Focus
gymnasium
on your
knew
balance.
it.
Keep your
The
core
judges
tight.
knew it.
Yes, ma'am.
His own body
Good.
knew
Now
it. That's why
watch
his
this
hands
defense
were
closely.
shaking. She is
Block
72
from the
years old.
Age is no
She
barrier
walks
to
with
the
a
way of
cane.
karate.
6 weeks
Watch
ago,
the basics.
she showed
Block,
up in a
punch,
white belt
kick.
tied slightly
Power
wrong.
from the hips,
And right
not
now,
the
the most
arms.
dangerous person in this
Observe
room
the
is
power
standing
of
perfectly
focus.
still,
Block, then
waiting for
focus.
him to
Your stance
understand
is
what
key.
just happened.
Yes, Sensei.
The laughter started before she even reached the front desk. Not loud, not cruel. Just that specific kind of quiet amusement that spreads through a room without anyone deciding to start it. A few exchanged glances, a smirk behind a water bottle, someone pretending to cough. Dorothea Washington didn't slow. She walked through the front door of Iron Phoenix Karate Academy on a Thursday afternoon in late October, wearing a floral cardigan over a white blouse, sensible shoes, an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. Her cane, dark wood, worn smooth at the handle, tapped a steady rhythm on the polished concrete floor. She carried a canvas bag over one shoulder, neatly folded inside, a white gi still creased from the package. She was 72 years old. She looked like someone's grandmother who had taken a wrong turn on the way to a church potluck. That was more or less what everyone in the room assumed. The woman behind the front desk looked up from her computer with the expression of someone who has decided to be patient before they've even heard the question. Can I help you? Yes. Dot set her bag on the counter. I'd like to enroll in your beginner's class. A blink, just one, but the kind that contained an entire conversation. Our beginner class, that's the one! For yourself? Dot looked around the lobby, slowly, deliberately, then back. I don't see anyone else with me. The receptionist laughed, caught herself, turned it into a small, professional smile. She pulled up something on her screen, asked about age, medical conditions, emergency contacts, standard questions. Dot answered each one without elaborating, without apologizing, without filling the silences that kept being left open, as if expecting her to say, never mind. I think I misunderstood the flyer. She didn't say never mind. She paid the enrollment fee. Cash. Exact change. Then she picked up her canvas bag and walked toward the locker room like she had somewhere to be. The main training floor at Iron Phoenix was large, clean, and smelled of rubber mats and effort. Mirrors lined 3 walls. A heavy bag hung in the far corner. Trophy cases flanked championships, state placements, a few nationals. Everything polished, everything deliberate. Roland Webb ran a tight dojo. He'd built Iron Phoenix from nothing 16 years ago. A converted garage in southwest Atlanta, 6 students, 1 set of borrowed pads. Now he had 200 active members, a waiting list for youth programs, and a reputation that brought in fighters from 3 counties over. He was 46, 5th-degree black belt, and had the posture that made other people sit up straighter without knowing why. He was running the 4 o'clock intermediate class when Dot walked out of the locker room. Hard not to notice her. She emerged in a white gi that was at least 2 sizes too large, sleeves past her wrists, pants bunched at her ankles, while white belt was tied competently enough but slight soft center. She moved to the back row without being directed there, which meant she either knew dojo etiquette or simply preferred the back. Roland filed it away, kept teaching, was doing his left. Deshaun Carter was doing what Deshaun Carter always did. Performing for the room, 23 years old, built like he'd been engineered for intimidation, with hands that moved fast and a mouth that moved faster. Genuinely talented. He also knew it in the way that makes talent difficult to be around. Beside him, Trey Okafor kept pace without effort, quieter than Deshaun. Bigger, too. He laughed at Deshaun's jokes approximately 2 seconds after everyone else, as if he was checking first to make sure they were funny. Deshaun spotted Dot in the back row within 40 seconds. He didn't say anything immediately. He waited, which was somehow worse, was straightforward, jumping jacks, his hip rotations, basic stretches, a slow jog around the perimeter. Dot followed along at her own pace. When the jog got too fast, she walked. Nobody said anything. Then they moved into stances. Back stance. Roland demonstrated each one. Clean, precise. The class followed. Dot watched first, then tried. Her front stance was too narrow. Back foot turned in. Roland corrected her twice, briefly, professionally. Deshaun could correct her from 3 feet away without being asked. Other foot, he said. No, the other one. Dot adjusted. Incorrectly. No, louder, louder this time. Your other foot. Trey laughed. 2 seconds late, as always. Roland shot Deshawn a look. Deshawn widened his eyes slightly, the universal expression of someone claiming innocence, and went back to his own stance. Dot said nothing. She adjusted her foot again, still wrong. And here is the thing nobody in that room understood yet. The wrongness was precisely calibrated, the kind of mistake that takes decades of skill to fake convincingly. But nobody was looking for that. They saw what they expected to see. A confused elderly woman, out of her depth, too proud to admit it. That's how it usually works. After the stance work, Roland paired students for basic partner drills, blocking combinations, simple offense and defense exchanges. Dot ended up with Deshawn. Roland matched them intentionally. He wanted to see how Deshawn handled it, whether he'd be respectful or whether Roland would need a conversation after class. The answer came within 30 seconds. Deshawn stepped into his fighting stance with a slight theatrical adjustment. A small performance for the students nearby. He threw a jab, light contact, except it wasn't quite light. It landed on Dot's forearm harder than necessary, and she stepped back half a step. Sorry, Deshawn said. Not sorry, he threw another one. Dot blocked it, barely. Awkwardly. You gotta get your hands up, Deshawn told her, demonstrating. Up here, basic stuff. Dot raised her hands. Deshawn threw a third jab. She didn't block it. It grazed her shoulder and she shifted back, weight settling in the wrong direction. She looked in that moment like someone who had never been in a fight in her life, which was the point. But nobody knew that yet. Maybe slow it down, Trey said quietly, because even Trey had a threshold. I'm going slow, Deshawn said. Go slower. Deshawn pulled back slightly, not much. But enough for Roland to nod and move on to the next pair. After class, while students were collecting their bags, Dot approached Roland near the equipment rack. She bowed slightly, thanked him for the instruction, then asked one question about foot positioning in the front stance. Specifically, whether the heel should be fully grounded or slightly elevated for transition. Roland answered on autopilot, then stopped, looked at her, because that was not a beginner's question. That was the question you ask when you already three possible answers and you want to know which framework someone else is working from. Good question, Roland said carefully. Thank you. Dot picked up her bag. I'll see you Monday. She walked out. Roland stood there for a moment, filed it away. The parking lot of Iron Phoenix sat between a dry cleaner and a smoothie shop, a strip mall off Cleveland Avenue. Thursday afternoon, the lot was half full, the light going gold and long. Dot was almost to her car, a 2009 Buick LeZab dark blue, maintained with obsessive care when she heard footsteps behind her. Not threatening, just fast. Alvin Carter fell into step beside her. She'd seen him earlier, waiting by the entrance, hands in his pockets. Deshawn's father. She'd clocked him the moment she walked in, broad-shouldered. A little heavy now, but the weights lay on a frame that had once been something. He moved like someone who used to fight and stopped. Excuse me, he said. Dot stopped, turned. Alvin looked at her the way people look at something they can't quite categorize. My son's in there. He nodded toward the dojo. Deshawn, I know who your son is, Dot said. Alvin nodded slowly, not embarrassed, calculating. I was watching through the window, he said, during the partner drill. Dot waited. The way you moved, Alvin said. After he hit your shoulder, you stepped back. But your weight didn't shift wrong. It shifted back exactly as far as it needed to. He paused. That's not what beginners do. Dot looked at him for a long moment. Your son needs to work on his front kick, she said. He's telegraphing it by 3 beats. Anyone paying attention will own him for it. She got in her car. She drove away. Alvin stood in the parking lot watching the blue Buick until it turned off the street. Dot's apartment was on the 14th floor of a building in Cascade Heights. Small, clean. Arranged by someone who thinks carefully about where things go and doesn't move them afterward. The living room held a couch, a coffee table, a television she turned on mostly for noise, and a bookshelf containing, in no particular order, 3 decades of utility bills she'd never thrown away, 2 cookbooks, a King James Bible with the spine cracked at Psalms, and 7 books on anatomy. On the top shelf, a framed photograph, a man and a woman, young, laughing. Stand sitting in front of a building somewhere in Atlanta, Penn had her head thrown back. The man had his hand at her waist and his eyes entirely on her face, like the building behind them didn't exist. Calvin Washington. Gone 22 years now. Dot still said goodnight to him sometimes. Not every night. Just when the quiet quit got to a particular density, she made dinner. Chicken thighs, rice, collard greens from a pot she kept going all week. Ate at the kitchen table with the overhead light on and the window dark. Afterwards, she washed the dishes by hand, dried them, put them away. Then she went to the bedroom closet. Top shelf pushed to the back behind a box of Calvin's old letters she hadn't opened in years. A wooden box, dark with age, the lid carved with a pattern that had mostly worn away. She sat on the edge of the bed with it in her lap. She opened it slowly, inside black belt, old. The fabric worn soft, the collar still deep, folded beside it. A photograph, black and white, edges soft with handling. A young woman, 22, 23, standing with a group of men outside a building. All of them in gi, all of them with black belts. The woman was the only one smiling, except the man standing next to her. He wasn't smiling at the camera. He was looking at her. The way people look at something they're proud of without knowing how to say it. Beneath the photograph, a newspaper clipping. 1974. The headline partially visible. Shawshishan wins Chicago Open second consecutive title for the rest torn away. Dot didn't look at the clipping. She looked at the photograph. At the young woman's face, that smile. Like she didn't know yet what was coming. Like she thought winning was the end of something instead of the beginning. She thought about the man looking at her in that photograph. Eddie, 26 years old and already the most alive person she'd ever known. She closed the box, set it on the nightstand, went to sleep. Petra Osi couldn't sleep past 5. It was a problem she'd had since college. Not insomnia exactly. More like her brain decided 4:58 a.m. was a reasonable time to start reviewing everything she'd ever said in any social situation since 2019. She'd tried melatonin, white noise, an app that played rainfall over a, say, singing bowl, which somehow made things worse. Eventually, she just started running. Piedmont Park at dawn was different from Piedmont Park at any other time. Quieter. The light came in flat and gray through the trees. Joggers moved past each other without making eye contact, the way people do when they've agreed to share something private. Petra had her earbuds in, a playlist she'd built for tempo. She was 4 miles into her usual loop, running past the oak grove near the southern end of the park when she saw the figure. She almost didn't stop, just a person, standing under the trees, doing something with their hands. Except Petra slowed, pulled one earbud out. The figure was a Dot Washington, Dot from the dojo. Dot with a cane and the oversized G and the slightly off-center white belt. Except there was no cane, and the gis was gone. She wore dark track pants and a fitted long-sleeve shirt, and she was moving, not stretching, not doing slow warm-up circles. Moving. Petra stopped completely. The kata Dot was performing, and that was the word. Performing, there was no other word for it, was something Petra had never seen taught at any level at Iron Phoenix. The sequence was long, complex. The footwork moved in patterns that seemed almost geometric, precise angles and pivots that built on each other with the logic of a proof. Her hands came out of the turns with velocity that shouldn't have been possible, shouldn't have been that quiet, shouldn't have been that controlled. And it was quiet. That was the thing. No grunt, no forced exhale, no performance. Just breath. And then the next technique. And the next. Land exactly where it was supposed to, with exactly as much force as needed and not one fraction more. Petra stood there with one earbud dangling. She thought, I am a third-year intermediate student, and I cannot do a single thing I am watching right now. She thought, that's not what someone who just enrolled in beginner karate looks like. She thought, I should go. I'm staring. This is weird. I should absolutely go. She did not go. Dot completed the absolute sequence. A pivot, a dropping strike, and then absolute stillness. The stillness as deliberate as everything that came before it. A period at the end of a sentence. She stood there for 3 full seconds. Then she turned, looked directly at Petra, who was standing 20 feet away with one earbud out, mouth slightly open, very obviously staring. Oh, Petra said, because what else do you say? Dot looked at her from an expression that was not angry and not particularly warm. The expression of someone who has made a calculation and arrived at a result. Go home, Dot said. Quiet, even. It's early. She picked up a small bag from the base of the tree that Petra hadn't noticed before, slung it over her shoulder, and walked away through the gray morning light. Petra stood in the oak grove for a long time after that. Her playlist kept going in the one earbud still in. She didn't hear any of it. Monday's class was more crowded than Thursday's. Roland had 2 sessions back-to-back. Intermediate at 4, beginner at 5:30. Dot arrived at 5:15, changed, tied her belt, sat on a bench near the entrance to the training floor, and watched the tail end of the intermediate class without appearing to watch it. Petra was in the intermediate class. She kept her eyes forward, did her techniques, did not look at Dot, did not stop thinking about the oak grove, but did not look. After the intermediate class ace cleared, the beginner students filtered in. 2 women in their 30s who had come together and kept whispering to each other. A man about Dot's age who introduced himself to everyone and whose name Dot immediately filed away because she filed everything away. Roland started the class. They worked on stances again, then basic blocks. Then a simple combination, jab, cross, front kick, that they would repeat in various forms for the next 3 months. Dot performed the combination wrong. Not the same wrong as Thursday. Different wrong. While jab came too early. The cross lost its hip rotation halfway through. The kick landed without the snap. Roland corrected her. She thanked him. Tried again, still wrong, but differently wrong. Roland frowned slightly, not in frustration, in something that wasn't quite suspicion, but was in the neighborhood of it. Trey was in the doorway, between sessions, pads on, waiting for a sparring partner to return from the water fountain. He had not been asked to observe the beginner class. He was there anyway. He watched Dot attempt the combination a 3rd time. She got the jab right, then overcorrected the cross, then the kick was half a beat late. He watched her try it again. The jab was wrong this time, but the cross was better, and the kick landed with slightly more control than before. He stood there very still. She wasn't just struggling. She was struggling with different things each time, like she was choosing what to get wrong and what to let improve, adjusting variables one at a time. That's not what beginners do. Beginners make the same mistakes repeatedly because they don't yet know what the mistakes are. She knew exactly what the mistakes were. He looked at Deshawn, who was watching from nearby, with the comfortable smirk of someone who has already did what he's looking at. Trey almost said something, didn't, looked away. The things you almost notice have a way of staying with you. After class, Roland was at his desk with the kind of paperwork that doesn't get easier the longer you look at it when he heard something through the interior window facing the training floor. Got up, looked through the glass. Dot was in the corner, doing the beginner combination. Jab, cross, front kick, slowly. Completely wrong. The same pattern she'd fumbled through in class. Roland watched for a moment. She wasn't practicing wrong technique and trying to fix it. She was practicing it wrong and not fixing it, like she was rehearsing a role, like she was making sure she had the specific shape of the mistake memorized. He stood there watching until she finished, set her bag on her shoulder, and walked out. He went back to his desk, sat down, opened the paperwork, didn't read it. He thought about the question she'd asked, the one about heel elevation in the front stance, the one that didn't belong in a beginner's mouth. He thought about Alvin Carter's face in the parking lot. That careful, deliberate attention of a man who had spent years learning to see past surfaces. He thought about the way she moved to the back of the room without being directed. He thought, "Who are you, Dorothea Washington?" He did not have an answer. He went back to the paperwork. Thursday, end of the 2nd week. Deshawn was leaving as Dot was arriving. He held the door, not out of courtesy. He was mid-conversation with Trey, and the door happened to be in his hand. But he held it, and Dot walked through, and for a moment they were 2 feet apart. Deshawn looked at her, not unkindly, not cruelly. The way someone looks at something they don't understand why it's there. "You coming back again," he said, not a question. "Every class," she said. Why? She looked up at him, 6 inches taller, 90 pounds heavier. Her face was completely even. "Because I want to learn," she said. Deshawn looked at her for another second. "All right," he said. He walked her to his car. He was halfway across the lot when he heard his father's voice. "Boy." Alvin was parked at the far end, got out slowly, walked over. "That was her," Alvin said. "That was who?" "The woman I told you about." Deshawn frowned. "The old lady from the dojo? Look at how she walks," Alvin said. Deshawn turned. Dot was still crossing the lot toward the entrance, unhurried, cane in hand. "It's like a normal person," Deshawn said. "She walks like someone who is choosing to walk like a normal person," Alvin said. "That's different." He paused. "I've known 3 people in my life who move the way she moves. 2 of them were fighters. One was a man who'd been in more bad situations than I can count. They all had that same thing. That way of occupying space like they know exactly what's in it. Deshawn said nothing. I'm telling you, Alvin said. That woman is not who she's saying she is. She says she's a beginner. Nobody is that specific about being a beginner, Alvin said. Beginners are just messy. She's precise. There's a difference. Deshawn looked at his father for a moment, then at the door Dot had just walked through. You're reading into it, he said. Maybe, Alvin said. He got back in his car, did not start it for several minutes. Petra went to the public library on Wednesday of the third week. She had a paper due in her sports history elective, finishing a communications degree at Georgia State, part-time, which meant everything happened at inconvenient times. And she needed primary sources that the university library charged for, and the public library did not. She found what she needed for the paper in 20 minutes. She spent another hour in the martial arts and combat sports section because she wanted to understand what she'd seen in the park, what level it was, what style, whether there was a name for it. She pulled 6 books. The 4th one stopped her. A History of American Cruelty, published 1981. A little ragged. The kind of book held together by the memory of glue more than actual glue. She found the index, checked practitioners, checked competitive records, checked women's divisions, Black American practitioners, the Chicago circuit of the early 1970s. Page 114. A short paragraph, 2/3 of a column, tucked between a write-up on a school in Detroit and an interview with a Chicago promoter. Among the most decorated competitors of the underground Midwestern circuit, Dorothea Washington stands as perhaps the most overlooked. A 2-time champion of the National Underground Karate Circuit Open, 1972 and 1973. Chicago, Washington was the first black woman to hold the title and, according to contemporaries, among the most technically sophisticated fighters of her era regardless of category. Her career ended abruptly following the 1974 Chicago Open. The circumstances of her withdrawal from competition have never been fully reported. Washington was 22 at the time of her final match. She has not competed or appeared publicly in the martial arts world since. For further information, see page 115. Torn out, cleanly, like someone had used a ruler. Petra sat there with the book open on the table in front of her. She turned it over, checked the back matter, checked the bibliography. Dorothea Washington appeared twice in the notes and not at all in the bibliography, as if someone had started to include her and then thought better of it. She stood the book, opened it again, read the paragraph 3 more times. 72 years old now. 2-time champion by 22. Disappeared in 1974. Never came back until a Thursday afternoon in October. Petra sat in the library for a long time. See, outside the afternoon went gray. Inside the overhead lights hummed. The whole world was moving at its regular pace, and Petra was sitting very still in the middle of it, holding a book with a torn page, thinking about a woman in a white geechee that was 2 sizes too large and a white belt tied slightly off-center. On purpose, she thought. Everything off-center on purpose. She checked the book out, put it in her bag, walked out into the gray afternoon. That night, Dot stood at the kitchen window with a glass of water and looked at the city. Atlanta at night from 14 floors up, not the dramatic downtown skyline, a quieter kind of beautiful, the amber grid of streetlights, the slow bolts of traffic signals, buildings that are mostly just lit windows, each one containing someone doing something ordinary. She thought about the week, about Deshawn's jabs landing harder than necessary, and how she'd stood there and taken each one's because that was the plan and the plan required patience. About Roland's careful frown after the question about foot positioning. About Petra in the oak grove, one earbud out, mouth slightly open. About Alvin Carter in the parking lot watching. He was right, of course. She'd known that the moment she saw him. Fighters always know other spent fighters. The way people who've learned a second language will always find each other in a room full of people who only speak one. She turned away from the window, washed her glass, set it on the drying rack, said goodnight to Calvin's photograph on the shelf, turned off the kitchen light. She lay in the dark for a while, thought about the wooden box on the nightstand, about the belt inside it, about the boy in the photograph who wasn't looking at the camera. Eddie, she thought. You would not believe this place I found. She thought, yes, you would. You'd love it. She almost smiled. Then she closed her eyes and let the city carry her to sleep. Gerald Freeman arrived on a Tuesday. No phone call. No warning. He just walked through the front door of Iron Phoenix at 4:10 on a gray November afternoon, wearing a polo shirt the color of old moss and carrying nothing but his keys. He was 69 years old, silver-haired, carried his weight in his chest the way retired athletes do, still there, still real, just slower to move. He walked without a cane, but with the slight forward lean of someone whose knees had opinions about stairs. The receptionist looked up from the front desk. "Can I help you?" "Just watching," Gerald said, "if that's all right." He found a seat along the wall, folded his hands in his lap, looked at the training floor like a man reading something in a language he used to be fluent in. Roland noticed him during the warm-up, filed it away, kept teaching. Dot arrived at 5:15 for the beginner class. She came through the lobby the way she always did, unhurried, canvas bag on one shoulder. Eyes moving across the room in that way she had, not obviously, not performatively, just taking everything in the way you take in a room when you've spent years understanding that rooms contain information. She saw Gerald, stopped, not dramatically, not visibly, to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Just the smallest hesitation. A fraction of a second, where her next step didn't happen when it should have. Gerald looked up, their eyes met across the lobby, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with the present moment. Something that had been sitting in storage for decades, waiting for the right room to open it in. Gerald stood slowly. "Dot," he said. She walked over. They shook hands, which was a strange thing to do, and both of them knew it was strange. But what do you do when someone walks back into your life after that long? You shake hands. You buy time. "You look good," he said. "You look old," she said. He laughed. Really laughed. And just like that, 50 years compressed in something smaller, something that fell into the lobby. She asked. Wasn't hard. "When that video came out, I know about the video. I figured you were ready. I didn't say I was ready. You walked into a karate dojo, Dot." She looked at him. "That's not nothing," he said quietly. She picked up her bag. "I have class. I know. I'll be here." She walked toward the locker room. He sat back down. Roland, who had watched the whole exchange from the edge of the training floor, went back to setting up cones and told himself it was nothing. Two old friends running into each other. He almost believed it. The video. Petra hadn't thought it was a big deal. That was the thing she kept coming back to afterward, in the weeks when the guilt of it settled on her like a second layer of clothing she couldn't take off. She hadn't thought it was a big deal. She'd posted it on a Tuesday night because the clip was sitting camera roll and it was beautiful, and she thought maybe 450 people would see it and think, yeah, that's something. She posted it at 9:47 p.m. By midnight, it had 12,000 views. By the time she woke up Wednesday morning, it had cleared 40. By noon, it was past 120,000, and 3 martial arts accounts with over 500,000 followers had reposted it, and someone had tagged it. Thunderhand is back. And Petra had no idea what that meant, but the comments certainly did. "She's back? No way this is real. Wait, is this Dorothea Washington's? My sensei has a poster of this woman on his wall from 1973 Chicago, 1972. Chicago, 1973. The woman who said no. If you know, you know. I trained under someone who saw her fight in person. This is not a drill." Petra read the comments with the sensation of someone who has pulled a thread and is watching the sweater unravel in real time. She called Dot, got voicemail, called again, voicemail again, texted.
"Miss Washington, I posted a video with your toast.
"No, I'm so sorry, I didn't think it would." Her phone rang. Dot. "Ah, I saw it," Dot said. "I'm so sorry, I can take it down." "No, a pause. Don't take it down." "Are you sure? Because I can." "Petra, quiet. Final. Leave it up." She hung up. Petra sat on her floor for a while after that, phone in her lap, watching the view counter climb in real time. She thought about the library book in her bag, about the torn page, about the paragraph that ended mid-sentence. She thought there's a reason the page was torn out. She thought, I need to know what was up. Dot watched the video alone in her apartment on her phone. Once, she sat at the kitchen table with the screen brightness turned all the way down as if that would make it smaller, as if she could contain it. 63 seconds of her in the ochre shot from Petra's phone at an angle that caught the light coming through the trees, gray and diffuse November light, and the kata she'd been performing. The clip started mid-sequence and ended just before she stopped, so what you saw was movement, sustained, uninterrupted, with no beginning and no end. Just the middle of it. Just the thing itself. She watched herself. 22 seconds in, she thought, "You're favoring the right shoulder." 38 seconds in, she thought, "The pivot is slower than it used to be." At the end, she thought, "It's still there. 50 years and it's still there." She closed the app, set her phone face down on the table, sat with her hands in her lap at the kitchen, quiet around her, sat in the city outside the window doing what it always does. Then she said out loud to no one and to someone, "All right, Calvin," like he'd been asking her something for a long time, like she'd finally decided to answer. She got up, put on her coat, went out into the November night, and walked 3 blocks to the 24-hour diner on the corner of Cascade and Beecher and ordered coffee and a piece of pie she didn't eat, and sat in the window booth watching the street for an hour, thinking about what comes next when you've spent 50 years not thinking about what comes next. The comments on the video kept coming for days. Petra read all of them. She knew this was probably not healthy, but she couldn't stop. She was trying to understand what she'd stumbled into. The martial arts community online was not large, but it was dense. People who under people who trained under people, long chains of lineage and memory. And what the video had surfaced was not just curiosity, but something closer to grief. The kind of grief communities carry for people they've lost without understanding what happened to them. She found a forum thread from 2009. 15 years old, still active. The subject line, "What happened to Dorothea Washington?" She read it from the beginning. The early posts were people who had competed in the 70s or trained under people who had. She was the best. She had a palm strike that I have never in 50 years seen anyone replicate. I watched her fight at the Chicago Open in 1973, and I went home and sat in my car in the parking lot because I knew I would never move like that. Not jealous, just honest. Then, deeper in the thread, a different tone. Someone named Regional Ref 74. I was at the Chicago Open that year, 1904. I was a junior official. What happened that night wasn't just a fight. There were people there with a lot of money on a specific outcome. When the outcome didn't go the way they planned, things got bad quickly. I left before the parking lot. I don't know everything that happened after. Reply. Can you say who? Regional Ref 74. No. I've said enough. Nothing after that. The account went dark. Petra printed the thread, put it in a folder with the library notes, went to sleep thinking about 1974, about money and a specific outcome, about a parking lot. She found Dot before class on Friday, just the two of them in the lobby, 5 minutes before anyone else arrived. Dot already in her gi, sitting on the bench, eyes forward. Petra sat down next to her, put the folder on the bench between them. Dot looked at it, didn't touch it. "I found your name in a book," Petra said. "At the library." "I know." "The page after your entry was torn out." "I know." "I found a forum thread from 2009. Someone said there was money on a specific outcome at the 1974 Chicago Open." Petra paused, "And that things got bad in the parking lot afterward." Silence. Dot's hands were folded in her lap and completely still. "Mrs. Washington," Petra said. "What happened that night?" Long pause. "Nothing I'm going to tell you in a lobby," Dot said. Then said. Dot looked at her, the unkindness. "You're persistent," she said. "I'm a communications student. It's a requirement." Something shifted in Dot's expression. Not a smile exactly, the memory of one. "Come to the park Sunday," Dot said. 6 a.m. 6, the mosquitoes are better by 6. She picked up her bag, walked toward the training floor. Petra looked at the folder still sitting on the bench. 6 a.m. She could do 6 a.m., probably. Sunday morning. The Oak Grove. Cold now. November cold that gets into your joints before you've decided to notice it. Dot was already there when Petra arrived at 5:58, which meant she'd been there longer. Her breath came steadily, not in the short puffs of some who just stopped moving. They on the bench. Dot looked at the trees for a moment. Then she started talking. Not at Petra, not quite at the trees, somewhere in the middle distance into the morning. "I grew up in Chicago," she said, South Side. My mother's family had been there since the 40s. My father was in and out, mostly out. My cousin Eddie Washington was the person I spent most of my time with growing up. He was 4 years older, and he thought that meant he was in charge of everything. Petra was quiet, did not take out her phone. Eddie found karate when he was 19. Some storefront a dojo on Halstead. "He made me come." A pause. He always said he made me come. What actually happened was he told me about it, and I got there before he did. Quiet for a moment. I trained for 7 years before I competed. Underground circuit, it wasn't sanctioned, wasn't pretty, mostly men who didn't want a woman on the floor until they saw what happened when she got there. Eddie managed my matches. I fought, he negotiated, that's how we worked. You won in 72 and 73, Petra said. Yes, and then 1974. Dot's hands were still in her lap, that stillness they always had. There was a man named Virgil Cross, she said. He ran money through the circuit, gambling, sponsorships, the whole machine. Nothing happened without him knowing. He reached out before the 74 Open. Told Eddie, not me, Eddie, that there was a preferred outcome for my match. That a significant number of important people had a significant amount of money on me to lose in the third round. He wanted you to throw the fight. He wanted me to lose, Dot said. There's a difference if you care about the distinction, did you? I won in 12 minutes. She said it without pride. Just a fact. Fastest title defense in the circuit's history, which nobody was going to put in any record book, but there it was. Petra waited. Afterward, Dot said, in the parking lot, 2 men. She stopped. Eddie saw them first. He stepped between us. Another pause, longer. He didn't step away fast enough. Silence in the oak grove, a bird somewhere, traff in the distance. He died 3 days later, Dot said. Hospital. Internal bleeding. She looked at the trees. He was 26 years old. Petra was very still. I had a scar and a black belt and nothing else, Dot said. Calvin, my husband. Later, he was the one who found me in the parking lot that night. He was a firefighter off duty, happened to be nearby. He called 911, rode in the ambulances. A pause. He never explained why he got in the ambulance. He just did. She was quiet for a moment. I left Chicago that year. Never competed again. Never went back to the circuit. She looked down at her folded hands. Eddie's death was ruled an assault with unknown perpetrators. Nobody was ever charged. Virgil Cross held a press conference 2 weeks later announcing a new sponsorship deal. Petra thought about the forum thread, about Regional Ref 74 saying things got bad and then going silent for 15 years. Is Virgil Cross still alive? She asked. He died last year, Dot said. October. Petra sat with that for a moment. But someone called Sandra, she said slowly. Someone told her to get you out of the dojo. Dot looked at her. How do you know that? Dot asked. I don't know it, I'm guessing. Based on the fact that 3 weeks ago Sandra started being strange and you're still here despite 2 attempts to cancel your membership on technicalities. Petra paused. Am I wrong? Dot looked at her for a long time. No, she said. You're not wrong. The morning light came through the trees. November thin but present. Virgil had a son, Dot said. He'd be in his late 30s now. She was quiet. He was raised on a version of this story. I don't know which version. Petra thought that. That's the page that was torn out, she thought. Someone's didn't want her to be found, she thought. But she came anyway. Why did you come back? Petra asked. To a dojo, after 50 years. Dot was quiet for a long moment. Because I was tired of the wooden box, she said. Sandra Holt had managed Iron Phoenix for 9 years. Before Roland, there'd been 2 other clients, a gymnastics studio that closed, and a CrossFit gym where everyone was insufferable. Before that, she'd done in corporate event planning, which she was good at, and before that, bookkeeping, which she was better at, but which didn't pay well enough to justify how boring it was. She was good at her job. She knew how to keep us business solvent. She knew when to push for new membership drives and when to let things coast. She knew which expenses to cut and which ones looked like savings but were actually liabilities. What she did not know, what nobody at Iron Phoenix knew, was that she had received a phone call 3 weeks before Dot Washington walked through the front door. A man's voice, controlled, precise. He'd asked about the dojo, how long it had been operating, whether it had ties to any of the old underground circuits from the 1970s Midwest scene. Sandra's had said no to that last one without knowing whether it was true. Then he'd asked whether a woman named Dorothea Washington had a connection to Iron Phoenix. Sandra had said no. At the time, it was true, he said. If she comes to your gym, call this number. Sandra wrote down the number, told herself it was probably nothing, did not throw away the number. Then Dot walked through the door on a Thursday afternoon in late October, and Sandra went to the filing cabinet and took out the number and held it in her hand for a long time before putting it back. She told herself she was still deciding. She was not still deciding. On a Wednesday afternoon 3 weeks later, when Rollins was in a meeting with a vendor about new floor mats, Sandra was alone in her office when her phone rang. Unknown number, she answered. Mrs. Holt, a man's voice, younger than before, colder. I understand you've had some difficulty removing a particular student from your roster. Sandra's hand tightened on the phone. Who is this? Someone with an interest in your dojo's continued operation, the voice said. Mrs. Washington needs to leave. You've been ineffective so far. I deleted her from the system. She re-enrolled. Her payment cleared this morning. A pause. This needs to end more permanently. What exactly are you asking me to do? I'm not asking, the voice said. I'm informing you. The situation needs to resolve. The line went dead. Sandra sat with her phone in her hand for a long time. Then she went to the filing cabinet, pulled out the folder with the tournament brackets for the regional championships, started making adjustments, small ones, the kind that are hard to trace. She did not notice Roland standing in the hallway outside her office. He'd come back early from the vendor meeting. He stood in the hallway for 45 seconds, hearing enough through the partially open door to understand the shape of what was happening even without all the words. He went back to his office, closed the door, sat with his hands flat on his desk, and thought about who he was, about what Iron Phoenix was built on, and about 15 years of work and what it was worth and what it cost. He thought about the question Dot had asked him in her first week, the foot positioning question, the one that didn't belong in a beginner's mouth. He picked up his phone and called Gerald Freeman because Gerald Freeman's number was in his contacts for reasons he hadn't thought about in years. Who is Dorothea Washington? Roland asked. Silence on the line. How much time do you have? Gerald said. Deshawn showed up at the park at 5:03 a.m. on a Thursday. He'd thought about it for 4 days. He'd thought about it during Tuesday's class, when Dot had done that thing again. The half-sass into fluency in the middle of a botched combination, gone before he could be sure he'd seen it. He'd thought about it on the drive home when his father called and asked how training was going, and Deshawn said fine. And his father went quiet in the way that it meant something decided not to say yet. He'd found the video. Of course he'd found the video. Everyone had found the video. He'd watched it 6 times. He'd read the comments, then the forum threads, then the short paragraph in a scan of an old book someone had uploaded to a digital archive. 2-time champion, first black woman, gone after 1974. He got to the Oak Grove at 5:03, and Dot was already there, moving through the tail end of something he didn't have words for. He stood at the edge of the tree line and watched until she stopped. She turned. Deshawn, she said, not surprised. How did you know it was me? Your shoes, she said. You dragged the left one slightly. I noticed the first week. He walked over, stood there, hands in his pockets because he didn't know what else to do with them. I watched the video, he said. I know, that's not a beginner. No, she said. It isn't. He looked at her. Why are you pretending? She considered this for a moment. Took her time with it the way she took her time with everything. I needs to see what kind of place it was before I showed it what I was, she said. You don't walk into a room and show your whole hand before you know the table. Deshawn thought about that. My dad knew, he said. First time he saw you. Your father has good eyes, Dot said. He earned them. He also said I've been wasting mine. A pause. He wasn't wrong. They stood in the Oak Grove in the cold morning air. Somewhere across the park, an early jogger passed on the outer path, track starting to build on the street beyond the trees. I want to learn, Deshawn said. For real. Not the stuff we do in class. What you do in class is real, Dot said. I want to learn from you. She looked at him for a long moment, reading something. Monday, she said. 5 a.m. Wear something you don't mind destroying. She picked up her bag and left him in the Oak Grove with the city coming awake around him. He stood there for a while, thought. All right, then. The sessions began the following Monday. Nothing like what Deshawn expected. He'd expected drills, combinations, a serious instructor finally dropping the pretense and teaching at full capacity. He'd pictured else keeping up, maybe barely, and that being the whole point. Instead, stand here. He stood, now breathe. He breathed. No, Dot said. Breathe, I am breathing. You're filling the top of your lungs. Asking hung it, breathing, do it again. He did it again. D adjusted his rib cage with 2 fingers, then his shoulders, then his chin. She didn't explain what she was doing. She just moved things until they were where she wanted them and stepped back. Now breathe. He breathed. It felt completely different. Like something in his chest had been wound tight for years and had just, without warning, let go. He didn't say that out loud, but she saw it on his face. Every technique you've ever learned, she said, has been built on the wrong foundation. We're going to take the foundation apart first. Then we'll rebuild. How long will that take? Longer than you want, she said. Are you staying? He stayed. She didn't throw a single punch in that first session, or the second, or the third. All breath and stance, and the terrifying stillness of standing in his position until his body must started telling him things he didn't know it knew. Trey noticed the change before anyone else did. Not dramatically. Just, Deshawn came to Thursday's class and moved differently. Marginally. Incrementally. The kind of shift that you'd miss if you weren't paying attention to the right things. Trey had paid attention to the right things since the night he'd watched Dot practice the combination wrong in 3 different ways and thought, she's choosing what to get wrong. After class, he caught up with Deshawn in the parking lot. What are you doing differently, Trey said. Not a question. Deshawn looked at him. 5 a.m. sessions, he said, in the park. With her, yeah. Trey nodded slowly. Looked at the dojo entrance. At the door Dot had just walked through. I want in, he said. I'll ask her, Deshawn said. Don't ask her. Just show up. Deshawn looked at him. That's not how she works. Then ask her, Trey said. But ask her tonight. He did. Dot said yes with the same brevity. She said everything, 1 word, no conditions. Come if you're coming. Trey showed up the next morning at 4:58 and stood at the edge of the oak grove waiting because he'd been raised to be early. Dot looked at him when she arrived. You drag your right foot, she said. Not your left. Trey blinked. How long have you been watching us? He asked. Since the beginning, she said. Breathe. Damon Cross walked into Ironfield on a Thursday afternoon at 4:30. The intermediate class running. He was 38, medium height, lean, with the economical movements of someone who trained seriously and didn't perform it. He wore street clothes, no bag. He told the receptionist he wanted to watch a class and found a seat along the wall. Roland noticed him within 2 minutes. Something about the way he watched, not casual, not curious. Analytical, like he was mapping things. Dot arrived 5:10. She came through the lobby and saw some sitting along the wall, and something happened in her face that Roland, watching from across the room, had never seen happen there before. Not fear, something older and more specific than fear. She stopped walking, a 1 beat, then continued, changed, came out in her gay. The man stood when she entered the training floor. He walked toward her with the unhurriedness of someone who has been moving toward the moment for a long time and has learned not to rush the last few steps. Mrs. Washington's, she says. The room didn't stop. Nobody else knew to stop. Roland kept class moving, kept his face mace neutral, kept one eye on the two of them the way you keep one eye on weather when you're not sure what it's going to do. I know who you are, Dan said. Quiet enough that only she could hear. I know who you are, too, she said. Then you know why I'm here. I have a guess. They looked at each other. The intermediate class moved around them. Punches, kicks, snap of gift fabric. The ordinariness of ordinary things while the people stood in the middle of it with 50 years of something between them. My father told me a story about you, Damon said. Your father told a lot of stories, Dot said. Some of them were even partly true. Something moved across his face. I'd like to see what you can do. You saw the video. I want to see it in person. Dot looked at him for a long moment. Ask Roland, she said. If he agrees, I'll spar with you. She walked to her position in the big air section. Damon stood where he was for a moment. Then he went to find Roland. The match happened that afternoon. Roland cleared the training floor after the intermediate class. Kept 6 students back, those who'd been around long enough to handle what they were about to see. Petra was one of them. Trey was one of them. Deshawn was one of them. Gerald Freeman, still sitting us along the wall, simply didn't leave. Dot and Damon squared off in the center of the floor. She was in her white belt. He was in street clothes. This was absurd, and everyone in the room understood that it was absurd, and nobody laughed. Because of the way they stood, the way they looked at each other. Roland said, begin. Damon moved first. Fast. Technical. A combination that showed years of serious training, not the underground circuit, something more formal, more recent. He was good, genuinely, seriously good. Dot didn't retreat. She moved inside his first combination the way water moves into a space, not forcing, not blocking, just finding where the space was and being there. His second technique collapsed because she was where it needed to go. His third landed on once nothing because she wasn't there anymore. She didn't strike, not once. She simply made it impossible for him to strike effectively. For 3 minutes she did this. Moving, redirecting, occupying space, denying space. The economy of it was something the watching students would try to describe later and find they didn't quite have the words. She used a third of the effort he used and achieved 3 times the result. He came at her with a combination faster and harder than anything before. Last resort energy. Frustration translated into speed. She stepped inside it. Her open palm came up and touched the center of his chest. Lightly, almost gently, she could have driven it through him. Everyone in the room understood that. She pressed it there for 1 second, then stepped back, dropped her hand. Damon stood still. His breathing was ragged. Hers was not. He looked at her hand, the one that had just been at his chest. "You didn't finish it," he said. "No," she said. "Why not?" "Because winning isn't the same as ending something," she said. "Your father never understood that. I'm asking if you do." Damon looked at her for a long time. Whatever he was feeling was complicated enough that his face couldn't hold only one version of it. It shifted, stayed, shifted again. He didn't answer. He walked to his jacket, picked it up, stopped at the door. "This isn't finished," he said. "No," Dot agreed. "It isn't." He left. The room was quiet. Gerald Freeman walked to Dot and stood beside her. "He has his father's footwork," Gerald said. "I know," Dot said, "but not his father's eyes." She picked up her bag, stood there for a moment, not moving. "He's confused," she said finally. "He's been told one story his whole life, and something in him doesn't believe it anymore. That's a dangerous place to be. Dangerous for him or for you." She thought about it honestly. "Both," she said. She walked out. Gerald watched her go. He sat back down in his chair along the wall and looked at the empty train floor for a long time. He thought about Chicago, about the storefront on Halsted, about a 20-year-old kid who showed up already knowing things it took most people a decade to figure out, and a 22-year-old woman who showed up before the doors opened and scared everyone in the room within the first 10 minutes. He thought about Eddie. He thought about the file he'd kept for 50 years in the back of a drawer in his house. Witness statements. The original police report, which was different from the version that ended up in Virgil Cross's filing cabinet. A photograph taken at the hospital the night of the parking lot, which Virgil Cross had never existed because Gerald had been careful about what Virgil Cross knew. He kept all because he believed the day would come when it mattered. He took out his phone, found Damon Cross's number, which he'd had gotten through channels he didn't need to explain. He typed, "We need to talk, not about fighting. About what your father did have to tell you." I set the phone down. Waited. 3 minutes later. When? Gerald looked at the empty training floor, at the space where Dot had stood with her palm against Damon's chest, demonstrating in one gesture everything Virgil Cross had never been able to learn. He typed back, "Tomorrow night, I'll come to you." He put on his jacket, walked out into the November dark, and for the first time in 50 years, felt the specific lights of someone who has decided to finally set something down. The morning of the regional championships, Dot woke at 4, not because her alarm went off, because she was already awake. Had been lying in the dark since before 3, hands folded on her chest, listening to the city do what the city does before dawn. The distant pulse of traffic, a dog somewhere. The refrigerator cycling on and off with the patience of something that has no reason to hurry. She lay there for a while and did not think about the tournament. She thought about a Tuesday afternoon in 1969 when she was 17 years old, and Eddie showed up at her mother's apartment with his jacket half-zipped and his sneakers untied, and that particular frequency he had when he'd found something worth finding. "Come on," he'd said. "I found a place." She'd complained the whole walk there. 23 blocks in October cold. Eddie talking the entire time about this gym on Halsted, this instructor, this thing he'd seen through the window that he didn't have words for yet. She'd complained all the way through the door. She'd been back the next morning before it opened. Eddie had laughed about that for years. She got up at 4:30, made coffee the way Calvin used to make it, strong enough to ease, a kind of coffee that tasted like a decision. Drank it standing at the kitchen window while Atlanta assembled itself in the dark below. The streetlights going amber, the first suggestion of movement on Cascade Road, the sky not yet committed to any particular color. She set the cup, went to the bedroom, opened the closet. Top shelf, the wooden box. She lifted it down and sat on the edge of the bed with it in her lap, the way she'd done hundreds of times over the past 50 years. And she opened it and she took out the black belt, not to look at it, not to think about it, to put it on. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror and tied it around her waist. The fabric had gone soft with age, worn smooth by handling, but the color was still deep, still real. She ran her thumb along the length of it, and then she stopped doing that and just looked at herself. 72 years old, gray hair, close cropped, a face that had been through enough weather to have opinions about it. The scar she knew was there under her shirt, pale and permanent, the thing Virgil Cross's people had left her with in a Chicago parking lot when she was 22 years old and had just won the most important match of her life. She didn't look like the girl in the photograph, but the eyes were the same. She picked up her bag, said goodnight to Calvin's photograph on the shelf. Good night, even though it was morning. Because that had always been their thing, a small joke stopped being funny sometime around year 12 and became something else, something that didn't need a name. She locked the door and went. The Atlanta Regional Karate Championships were held at the Chastain Park Gymnasium, a space that smelled of floor wax and old competition, and the particular nervous energy of 200 people who had been training toward a single day for months. Iron Phoenix arrived as a unit. Roland had rented a van. 8 students, quiet in the way people get quiet before something they've prepared for. Deshawn sat in the back with his hands in his lap and his eyes closed, not sleeping, breathing. The way Dot had taught him, measured and deliberate, the breath going somewhere real instead of just filling the top of the lungs and calling itself enough. Trey watched him do this from the adjacent seat and said nothing. Sandra was not there. She had received a certified letter from Roland 2 days prior, so signed by 2 witnesses, outlining what he knew and what he intended to do about it. The letter was specific. It had dates and names and a partial transcript of the phone call he'd overheard through the office door. It concluded with her immediate suspension pending formal review. She had responded by email, 1 line, lowercase, no punctuation, and had not been heard from since. Roland had spent part of the drive wondering if he'd done the right thing. Then he'd looked in the rearview mirror at Deshawn breathing in the back seats and stopped wondering. Gerald arrived separately in his own car, which was how Gerald did things, and was already seated along the wall of the gymnasium when the Iron Phoenix van pulled into the lot. He'd brought coffee in a thermos, and the expression of a man who has been waiting a long time for a particular day, and is being careful not to let the waiting show. Dot parked the blue Buick at the far end of the lot and sat it for a moment with the engine off. She could hear the gymnasium from here. Muffled, indistinct, the sound of many things happening at once. She thought about Eddie, not the parking lot. The gym on Halstead, the smell of that place, old mats, liniment, Chicago cold coming through the gaps around the door. The way the instructor had looked at her the first time she'd stepped to the floor. Not welcoming, not unwelcoming, just watching. Waiting to see was made of, she thought. I know, Eddie. I know you would have loved this. She got out of the car, walked across the lot. The black belt was under her warm-up jacket. Nobody could see it yet. She'd put it on that morning and not thought about it again. It was just there, the way it used to always be there. Inside, the first person she saw was Petra. Petra, who had arrived early and claimed a position near the registration table with the instinct she'd been developing for being in the right place at the right time. She was in her G. Iron Phoenix black and red. She looked at Dot's warm-up jacket, then at Dot's face, and understood immediately that something was different. You're not here as a spectator, Petra said. No, Dot said. What changed? Dot thought about the kitchen window that morning, about the coffee, about 50 years of a wooden box sitting on a shelf. I got tired of watching from outside, she said. Petra nodded slowly. Then her face did something complicated. He's here, she said. Damon. Dot didn't react visibly. I know, she said. You knew he'd come. I knew he had to come eventually, Dot said. Better here than somewhere else. She walked toward the warm-up area. Petra watched her go, then pulled out her phone, not record, just to hold. Some moments you need something in your hand. Gerald found Dot during the first break between divisions. He came and stood beside her without announcing himself the way he'd always moved, and for a moment they just watched the gymnasium together. The rings, the judges, the students warming up. The parents lined up along the walls with a particular mixture of pride and anxiety that parents have always had at these things. I went to see him, Gerald said. Dot looked straight ahead. I know, she said. I figured it was you. The file. Gerald paused. Everything. The original police report, the witness statements, the photograph from the hospital. She was quiet. He read all of it, Gerald said. Took him about an hour. I sat in his kitchen and drank bad coffee and didn't say anything while he read it. How did he take it? Gerald thought about this carefully. Like a man who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time, he said, and has just been told that what he's been holding isn't what he thought it was. Dot absorbed this. He's going to want to talk to me, she said. He's going to need to talk to you, Gerald said. There's a difference. She looked at him then. This man she'd known since she was 20 years old, who had been in the crowd at Chicago in 1972 when she won the first one, who had kept the documentation, maintained the thread back to something true, carried it for 50 years without being asked to and without putting it down. Thank you, Gerald, she said. Don't thank me, he said. I should have done it sooner. Maybe, she said. But you did it. He nodded, looked at the floor. One more thing, he said. I spoke to Roland. She already knew what he was going to say. A demonstration, she said, before the advanced division, you and me. The old form, he said, from the circuit, the one we built on Halstead. The kata they'd put together in 1971, she and Gerald and Eddie, in that storefront dojo, when all three of them were too young to understand what they were making. Built from the ground up, pieced together from everything they'd learned and everything they'd figured out on their own. Nobody else had ever learned it. Nobody else was alive who remembered it. Dot looked at the main ring, at the floor, the space, the light coming through the high windows. All right, she said. Deshawn's division ran at 9. Under 25 open, which sounds contained, but it isn't, because open divisions at regionals pull from everywhere, and you never know what you're walking into until you're standing across from it. What he walked into was a 24-year-old from a Savannah gym who had won this division 2 years running. Shoulders like load-bearing walls. He bounced on the balls of his feet with the easy confidence of someone who has not yet been genuinely surprised in a competition ring. The referee called them to attention. Deshawn breathed. Not the old way, the new way. Ribcage expanding, weight dropping, the breath going somewhere real. He thought about the Oak Grove at 5 in the morning, about standing in punso position until his body started telling him things he didn't know it knew. About the morning Dot had said, "You've been fighting people's bodies. Start for fighting their balance. There's a difference." He thought about the question she'd asked him off that first morning, and he hadn't been able to answer. He thought, I know now. I know what I'm fighting for. The referee said, begin. The Savannah fighter came fast and direct, full commitment, the kind of opening that had ended matches right there. Deshawn didn't meet it. He moved not back, sideways and slightly forward, finding the angle that made the big technique miss by the smallest possible margin. His counter came from where he actually was, instead of where he'd been projecting himself. Clean. Economical. It landed and he was already somewhere else before the other man could process what had happened. The Savannah fighter adjusted, got more careful, more technical. Deshawn stayed calm, not the performed calm of someone pretending not to be nervous. The actual thing. The stillness that comes from having a foundation. The match lasted 4 minutes. Deshawn won by 3 points. When the referee raised his hand, he didn't pump his fist or shout. He bowed to his opponent, shook hands, walked off the ring. In the stands, Alvin sat with his hands on his knees. He didn't say anything he didn't have to. Deshawn glanced at him on the way back to the team area. Alvin nodded once, small, deliberate. The kind of nod that contains a paragraph. Deshawn nodded back. That was enough. More than enough. Trey won his match by a point in overtime, which involved considerably more drama, and at least one moment where Roland closed his eyes and appeared to be doing something that wasn't quite prayer but was in the same neighborhood. Petra fought in the women's intermediate division and lost by 1 point and did not seem devastated, which was itself a kind of progress. The old Petra would have been wrecked by it. This Petra bowed to her opponent, shook hands, and came back to the team area and said, I see what I need to work on, which made Roland look at her for a moment longer than usual. The demonstration was announced at 11:30. Roland made it brief. He said there would be a performance before the advanced division. He said it would be worth staying for. That was all. People stayed. Dot and Gerald walked to the center of the main ring. She took off her warm-up jacket. The gymnasiums noticed, not all at once. In a wave, the way awareness moves through a crowd, one person seeing. then the person beside them, then the row behind, until the whole room should shifted its attention without anyone deciding to shift it. The black belt. Old, soft, worn at the edges. Real in a way that new things can't be real. Deshawn saw it from the team area and stopped moving completely. Trey put a hand on his shoulder and neither of them said anything. Petra had her phone face down in her pocket. She'd made the decision sometime in the past few weeks, without quite articulating it to herself, that some things needed to be witnessed rather than documented. This was one of those things. Dot and Gerald stood in the center of the ring. They bowed to each other, stood in the starting position. The gymnasium went quiet in the particular way that large spaces go quiet when something is about to happen that people don't have a category for yet. Then the kata began. What most people in that gymnasium saw was two elderly people moving through a sequence of techniques. A woman in her 70s, a man in his late 60s, both of them well past the age when the body does what you ask without a conversation first. But that's not what it looked like. Because what 50 years gives you, what the accumulation of every session, every correction, every hour in every gym across every decade gives you, is not speed in the conventional sense and not power in the way young people mean when they use the word. It's precision. It's the compression of all that time into each movement until there is nothing wasted, nothing performed, nothing present that doesn't need to be there. Just the thing itself. The kata moved between them like a conversation, between people who have known each other long enough that the words aren't the point anymore. Gerald's movements, suggesting. Dot's answering, each phrase building on the last with a logic that was invisible unless you had spent enough years looking for it. And if you had spent those years, it was the most visible thing in the room. The palm strike in the third sequence. That was the moment. The technique Eddie had named the last word, because Eddie named everything, because that was how Eddie moved through the world, finding language for things that didn't have it yet. A palm strike rising from below, driving upward, the kind of thing that in any real context was precisely as dangerous as it looked. Dot performed it, and the gymnasium was so quiet you could hear the gi move through the air. 1 second of absolute stillness at the end. Then Gerald bowed to her. She bowed back, and the room came apart. Not the polite applause of people acknowledging something technically impressive. Something different. The kind of response that happens when people have witnessed something that moves through the category of skill and into something that doesn't have a name in the usual vocabulary. Several people were on their feet without having decided to stand. Someone near the back started it, and it spread before it could be thought about. Deshawn was applauding before he knew he'd started. He thought about the oak grove, about standing in the dark at 5 a.m. being told to breathe, about the question he hadn't been able to answer. He thought, this is what she was protecting. This is what she's been carrying. This is what she almost let go of and didn't. Damon Cross was standing along the far wall. He was not applauding. He was completely still, hands at his sides, watching the woman in the center of the ring with the expression of someone who has just understood something they should have understood a long time ago and is deciding what to do with the understanding. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, took out a manila envelope, old, the creases gone from folding and unfolding, and walked across the gymnasium floor toward Dot. People stepped out of his way without knowing why. He stopped in front of her. She was still in the center of the ring, Gerald a step behind her, both of them coming down from the stillness of the sata's end. She looked at Damon. He looked at her. Between them, all the years and all the distance and all the weight of a story that had been told wrong for 50 years. He held out the envelope. She looked at it, didn't take it yet. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Gerald Freeman," Damon said. "He came to see me 2 weeks ago." She looked over Damon's shoulder at Gerald, who met her eyes with the expression of a man who has finally paid a debt he's been carrying for a long time and feels the exhaustion that comes with that, the specific tiredness of something set down after decades. She took the envelope. She didn't open it. She knew what was inside. Gerald had told her it existed years ago, briefly. Gerald did things. He'd said he'd record documentation. He'd said the day might come. She'd told him she hoped it didn't. She'd been wrong. "My father told me you destroyed him," Damon said. His voice was controlled. The control of someone who has been very careful for a long time and is deciding in this moment whether to keep being careful or to put that down too. That you cheated. That you went to the circuit authorities and manufactured a case against him out of spite because he'd tried to do business with you and you'd refused. Dot waited. He told me Eddie Washington was involved in things that made what happened to him in that parking lot inevitable. Damon stopped. The muscles in his jaw moved. He told me you left Chicago because you were guilty, not because you were afraid. And now? Dot asked. Damon looked at the envelope in her hands. Gerald brought me the original police report, which he said, the witness statements from people who were actually there. A photograph taken at the hospital the night it happened. He paused. My father had a version of that police report in his files. I found it after he died. I thought it was the real one. He stopped again. It wasn't the real one. Silence. Around them, the gymnasium had gone still in a different way than it went still for the kata. Then had been the silence of people holding their breath at something beautiful. Now it was the silence of people understanding they were witnessing something private and not knowing whether to look away. My father died last October, Damon said. He never admitted anything. Not to me, not to anyone. He told the same story until the end. He looked at his hands for a moment. I spent 38 years carrying what he gave me. I didn't know I was allowed to put it down. Dot looked at him. She thought about Eddie. Not the hospital, not the parking lot. Eddie at 19, walking into that gym on Halstead for the first time, turning around in the doorway to make sure she was following, that grin he had when he was certain he'd found something real. She thought about what it costs to carry something that belongs to someone else. She thought about this man in front of her, 38 years old, who had grown up in a house full of grievance and no honest context for it. Your father, she said, was a man who built everything on other people losing. When someone refused to lose for him, he didn't know what to do except make it mean something it didn't mean. She paused. You were 6 years old when that happened. That's not your weight to carry. Damon's jaw tightened. I was not 6 years old, he said, carefully. When I came to your dojo. No, she said, you weren't. But you were still carrying something you didn't put there yourself. She looked at him steadily. The question isn't what your father did. The question is what you do now, with what you know, with what you are. Was quiet for a long moment. The gymnasium breathed around them. Gerald said there might be a place, Damon said. The words came out careful, like he was handling something that might break if he wasn't paying attention. At the dojo. If I want to? Yes, Dot said. He looked at her. Yes, she said again. Simply. No conditions, no performance of forgiveness that would make it about her rather than about him. Just the word. Here. Now. Come if you want to and don't. That's yours to decide. Something happened in his face then that he probably hadn't planned for. He nodded. Once. That was enough. Gerald stepped forward. He looked at Damon for a moment, then at Dot. His face was doing several things at once, the particular expression of someone who has waited a very long time for a room to contain certain people simultaneously and is now standing in it. I've been waiting to be in this room, he said, for a long time. You picked a dramatic venue, Dot said. I've always had a sense of occasion. She looked at him. This man she'd known since she was 20, who had been there at the beginning and had kept the thread running back to something true through 50 years of silence. Thank you, Gerald, she said. Don't thank me, he said. I should have done it sooner. Maybe, she said. But you did it. He nodded. Then looked at the gymnasium floor and cleared his throat in the way people clear their throats when they're done being emotional about something and have decided to stop. Roland's waiting, he said, for the announcement. Roland made it from the center of the main ring. He didn't have a microphone. He had his voice, which 20 years of projecting across training floors had made into something that carried without effort and landed without aggression. He was brief and he was specific. He named Sandra Holt. He named the tournaments whose bracket she had adjusted. He cited dates. He described on the phone calls and the records deletion and the outside interference in the dojo's operations. He did not editorialize. He did not perform outrage. He said what had happened in the plainest language he had. When he finished, the tournament director stepped forward and spoke quietly to two officials who moved with purpose toward the administrative table. The gymnasium buzzed. Parents turned to each other. Competitors from other dojos leaned together. Roland stepped back out of the ring. He found Dot beside him almost immediately. That took courage, she said. It took being tired of the alternative, he said. She almost smiled. He looked at her. at the black belt visible now that the warm-up jacket was gone, at the woman he'd written off as a liability on the first day and had spent the subsequent weeks slowly, reluctantly, honestly reassessing. "I want to talk to you about the dojo," he said. "About what it should be for." "I know." "I've been teaching people to win," he said. "I think that's the wrong thing to have been teaching." "Winning isn't wrong," Dot said. "No. But when it's the only purpose," he stopped, looked at Deshawn across the gymnasium, who was standing with his father, the two of them in a conversation that seemed to be going differently than their conversations usually went. "I watched him fight this morning. I've watched him for 3 years. I've never seen him fight like that." "He found something to fight for," Dot said. "That's all. The technique was always there. Whatever you've been teaching him at 5 in the morning," Roland said, "that's what this place should be built around." Dot looked at the gymnasium, at the rings, the judges, the students and parents and coaches, the whole living apparatus of people who had decided that this was worth their time. She thought about the storefront on Halsted Street. She thought, "Eddie, I think I found something worth staying for." "The name stays Iron Phoenix," she said. "Of course. But we add to it." Roland waited. "Washington Webb," she said. "After me and after my cousin Eddie." She looked at Roland. He never got to see any of this. "The least I can do is make sure his name is on the door." Roland was quiet for a moment. "Done," he said. 3 weeks later, the sign went up. Iron Phoenix Washington Webb Karate Academy. Clean lettering on white. Roland had suggested something more elaborate. Dot had said, "The thing speaks for itself or it doesn't speak at all." The sign said what it needed to say. The dojo had changed in those 3 weeks in ways that were hard to quantify and easy to feel. Something in the air of the place had shifted. Roland had gone back to foundations, rebuilt his approach from the ground up, working from the philosophy Dot had introduced through those early morning sessions in the park. The breath-first framework that made technique mean something different than it had before. It was uncomfortable and necessary, and he said so to his students directly, which was itself a new way of teaching. Deshawn was there every day, not just for classes. He arrived early and stayed late and could be found in corners of the training floor at odd hours working through what Dot had given him. The breath, the weight, the quality of stillness that is not the absence of movement, but the condition from which real movement becomes possible. He'd started talking differently, more considered, like he was listening to himself. His father came to watch on a Tuesday, sat along the wall, watched Deshawn work through a solo form for 20 minutes without being aware he was being watched. Afterward, when Deshawn came off the floor, "Your Uncle Reginald used to move like that," Alvin said. Deshawn looked at him. "I didn't know Uncle Reginald trained." "He didn't," Alvin said. "He just moved like that." A pause. "Your grandmother would have liked to see this," Alvin said. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Trey took over the Saturday morning fundamentals class, which he'd volunteered for. In the quiet way, he did everything. No announcement, just appearing one Saturday and doing it. He turned out to be a natural teacher. Patient, clear, funny in exactly the right doses. The students liked him immediately, and Roland put him on the official schedule by the second week. Damon came on Thursdays. He taught a supplemental session, Conditioner, Modern Movement Principles, the technical vocabulary of contemporary training methods. He and Dot did not teach together. They taught separately. But on Thursday evenings, after the session ended, they sometimes sat near the entrance and talked, mostly about the work, about what they'd observed in students that week, what had landed and what hadn't. It wasn't friendship yet. It was the thing that comes before friendship when two people have enough history between them that they have to build toward the ordinary slowly. Petra published her article. Georgia State Students Paper, 3,000 words, nothing that hadn't happened. The editor wanted to cut the section about E. Washington, said it was a profile piece, disrupted the flow. Petra said no. The editor said, "Let's find a compromise." Petra said, "Eddie Washington was 26 years old, and he is in the name of the dojo above the door. He is not a compromise." The section stayed. Black Belt magazine ran a shorter version 6 weeks later. They used a photograph Roland had taken on a Thursday evening. Dot at the front of the training floor, shot from behind and to the left, 3/4 profile. She was demonstrating something to a student whose face was visible over her shoulder. Young, focused, leaning forward with the posture of someone saying something important. The caption read, Dorothea Washington 2. Iron Phoenix, Washington Web Karate Academy, Atlanta 2024. 2 dates, 52 years between them. The first Saturday under the new name, Dot ran the morning fundamentals class. Not because she'd planned to. Trey had called at 7 with a fever and a voice that suggested he'd be awake with it for a while. The class was scheduled. She was already up. She said, I'll cover it, and hung up before he could apologize. 11 students, all adults. The youngest in her early 20s. The oldest a man who had to be pushing 60 and moved with the deliberate care of someone who had come to this later than he'd intended to. They gathered near the entrance to the training floor, uncertain in the way new groups are uncertain before something has established itself. Dot walked to the center of the floor. She didn't say welcome, didn't say good morning, didn't announce herself, or explain the change in instructor, or do any of the things that fill up the space before the actual work begins. She said, stand here. They moved to where she indicated. Now breathe, she said. One of them said, just breathe? Just breathe, she said. They breathed. She walked among them. A ribcage here, a shoulder there. A foot moved 2 inches to the left, a chin lifted slightly. Each correction finding the exact adjustment that particular body needed, rather than a general principle applied uniformly, because there is no such thing as a general body, and the instruction that pretends there is will always fall short. She came back to the front. Again, she said. They breathed again, and several of them felt it. That thing that happens when you stop filling the top of your lungs and start breathing from somewhere real. The shift in weight. The small cease of something held without knowing it was held. The body remembering briefly what it feels like to be inhabited honestly. Man near the back, the older one, the one who had come to this later than he'd meant to, made a sound. Not intentional. Just the sound a body makes when it lets something go. Dot looked at him, nodded. That's it, she said. That's what we're here for. She stood at the front of the room and looked at them. These people who didn't know yet what they were capable of, who had walked through a door on a Saturday morning looking for something, though most of them couldn't have named exactly what. Something to make the body feel real. Something to show them what they were made of. Something that told the truth. She thought about the gym on Halstead. The smell of it. The cold coming through the gaps in the door. The instructor who had looked at her the first time she'd stepped onto the floor with that expression that wasn't welcoming and wasn't unwelcoming, but was simply waiting to see what she would do. She thought about Eddie turning around in the doorway to make sure she was following. She thought, I'm still following Eddie. 50 years later, and I'm still following you into every room you pointed me toward. She thought, thank you for finding it first. She thought, thank you for the walk there. She looked at the 11 people standing in front of her with their feet on polished wood and their faces turned toward her and their whole lives ahead of them, whatever their whole lives were and however much of them remained. She placed her hand over her chest, over the place where all of it had always started, where it still lived, where it would go on living after her, in everyone she gave it to, in the room whose name now carried Eddie's, and in the room after that, and the one after that, forward into a future she wouldn't see but had helped to make possible. One more time, she said. Quiet, even. Breathe, stand still. Begin. They did, and the room held them. And outside the windows, Atlanta moved through it Saturday morning, and the light came in low and gold across the floor, and somewhere under the new sign above the door 2 names stood together in clean black letters, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.